So 5G4D has been going for nearly 5 years now, and I'm sure many of you will have missed some of the early interviews because you weren't there at the beginning. I mean, why would you have been? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to release some classic episodes from some legends of the industry that you might have missed. And so I hope you enjoy these shows, and I hope you enjoy the brand new ones that come out every 2 weeks. So thank you for listening, and enjoy. Out of the street corners they scream. You knew it was coming. You've been waiting for this for months. Rumour hardened into fear and now they scream at you. The sirens, their hysterical wail tearing through the white noise of the city. And you run. You run to pick up those things that can never be replaced. A picture of them in the days when they still loved you. Your mother's wedding ring. And then you turn to your shelf of games. You only have room for 5. 5 games for Doomsday. 5 Games for Doomsday is a show in which board game personalities are thrust into a cabin in the woods to outrun an oncoming disaster, but can only take 5 of their games with them. But which will they choose? My guest this week caused a huge splash in the gaming world with her first published game, Wingspan. It was featured in the New York Times and the cause of much internet consternation when it sold out its first print run before it even hit shops. Alongside game design, she's worked in the field of American health and is a former employee of the US Department of Health and Human Services. She's also an advocate for greater visibility for women in gaming and hosts a database for female designers. My guest this week is Elizabeth Hargrave. Elizabeth, welcome to the cabin.
Thanks for having me.
So to begin with then, how difficult was it for you to choose the 5 games to take with you?
It was horrible. I hate picking. How difficult was it? I feel like I had 2 or 3 that were like shoo-ins and then a long list of possibilities for the other slots.
And I mean, what was the requirement that you picked? Was it sentimental? Was it purely utilitarian? These are my favorite games. What was it?
There's definitely some sentimentality. There's some older games on the list that I'm like, I am still playing these games. They will probably last a while. And I didn't really check with you about what sort of doomsday scenario this was, but assumed that I should take games that my spouse will play with me.
Well, I always like people to choose their own personal hell with regard to this, so.
My husband teaches foraging classes, so our friends often tease us that we'll do better in the average apocalypse than most people we know.
Yeah, well, I usually ask people this. So if your husband teaches foraging classes, you know, firstly, which mushrooms are edible and then which mushrooms will get you high enough to save you from the horrible realization of the post-apocalyptic world then.
Right. And there's a couple around here that will kill you. So, you know, those ones are good to know too.
And so you live in the countryside, yeah. Do you feel like...
No, I'm actually about a mile from the border of Washington, D.C.
Ah, okay. So do you consider yourself a city person or a country person? Where do you feel most at home?
I love being right on the edge. So we have a giant backyard and a big vegetable garden, but then I can, you know, walk to the subway and get right into the city. And that's perfect for me.
And so, with regards to games, how do you feel about them as objects? Because, you know, the doomsday comes, you can only take 5 games with you. Will you lament the loss of these objects, or, you know, will there be part of you that feels sort of relieved to be unencumbered?
That's a good question. I'm not too attached to them as objects. I like having options, but I don't have I'm not a collector. I don't have a huge collection of games. I tend to cull it pretty frequently and like the feeling that everything on my shelf is something that I would be happy to play anytime.
And where would you place yourself as a gamer? Do you like the heavy games? Do you like the medium games?
I'll play most things. I can go pretty heavy, but I tend not to like to go super long. And really the only games that I don't like are social deduction.
And why is that, would you say? Are you a terrible liar?
I'm a terrible liar and I don't enjoy it. And I don't enjoy being lied to. which I discovered sort of playing a few rounds of things like The Resistance and just feeling terrible about it.
So I want to go back to the beginning. So you said you moved around a bit as a child, but then you settled in Florida. Now, Florida has become something of a meme over the last few years on the internet. Is Florida as crazy as the internet would have us believe?
I think parts of it are. I was in a college town, so, the whole Florida man thing wasn't so strong there. But yeah, there's some real... people have different images of Florida, right? Because you get Southern Florida, which is all retirees and a lot of money. And then you have Disney World in the middle of Florida. And then North Florida is really like deep south. Like it might as well be Georgia, for folks that means anything to. So yeah. And then the University of Florida is in Gainesville, Florida, which is North Florida. So it's sort of this, big university culture plopped down in the middle of otherwise quite rural, backwoodsy Florida.
And so is Florida generally quite a conservative part of the world? Or, is the university town like all university towns, kids drinking too much and, we all see Spring Break on the TV and everything.
Right. Gainesville is one of the more liberal parts of North Florida, for sure. So the last several elections, elections have actually been like down to the wire sort of over time because the vote is so nearly split between Democrats and Republicans, so conservative and liberal. When it's statewide, it's a very divided state with a lot of different pieces to it.
Can you split? Is a Florida Democrat different to a California Democrat or a New York Democrat?
That's a good question. Probably. I haven't lived there long enough that I'm not sure I can say these days.
It seems the two parties have a fairly broad church. It's what it seems to me.
Yes, for sure. Florida Democrats probably on average are less liberal than California or New York Democrats, which is a tradition in the South. The Democratic Party was very conservative for a long time down there.
And so then you went on to university and you studied public policy. So firstly, what does that entail? And secondly, what drew you towards that area?
Yeah. So public policy is sort of a conglomeration of things that might help decision makers in the government. So you do some statistics and some economics and some history and some, subject matter expertise in whatever you're interested in. I actually started out as a religious studies major in college and thought about becoming a Unitarian minister, but was realized at some point that I'm not really outgoing enough to be in that kind of position and wanted to be sort of more directly helpful and sort of hands-on to making things better in the world. So I thought public policy might be that track.
And, is this, people study for certain reasons. I studied acting because I have absolutely no desire to ever have any money at any point in my life. But is there a career there at the end of a public policy degree? Can you become a civil servant and lead quite a sort of comfortable, normal, solid life? Or is it, full of ups and downs?
It worked for me. The one thing that can be full of ups and downs is if you go the very political route, then you may be in and out of jobs more regularly. But civil service, if you're just taking a mainstream government job that's not a political appointment, then it can be a very stable line of work.
And you studied areas like public health and issues surrounding poverty. What interested you about those areas?
I think just wanting to help people. Health really fascinates me because our healthcare system in the United States is so convoluted, but your personal health is like so fundamental to having a good life. And to the extent that people have issues that are unaddressed, and especially if there are issues just because they can't afford to get them addressed, that's really troubling.
And you said you looked into areas of poverty. I mean, how big is the gap between the richest and the poorest in America? Is it absolutely huge? Is it sort of, when we think of India, we see the big high-rise buildings with the shanties built around the foot of them. Is it a sort of similar situation in America?
I mean, I don't think it's as visible and as close in the United States as it is in a place like India, where you get that strong visual standing in one spot. But it's a huge divide. I mean, there are a lot of people really struggling to make it, and the safety net has been under attack for a long time here. So the bottom is maybe not as low as it is in a place like India, but still really people just scraping by. And then, we've got the Bill Gates and the Donald Trumps of the world, and below them a significant class of folks that really don't have to worry about anything.
And I assume don't pay an awful lot of tax.
So they say. I mean, I haven't really personally looked into it, but yes, there are a lot of ways to file your taxes and get out of paying a large percentage of your income. Certainly paying less taxes than in most places in Europe.
And, a big sort of issue in Britain at the moment is not those people sort of at the absolute bottom, but it's what we call the working poor. So people who have jobs and yet still have real difficulty making ends meet. Is that a factor?
For sure. And here healthcare plays a big role in that. So, we've over the last several years during the Obama administration sort of tried to expand programs for low-income people to get their health insurance covered, to start trying to reach up into that sort of working poor segment that otherwise couldn't buy insurance in the marketplace because it's just too expensive. And so that sort of, having some income, not being totally destitute, can really can disqualify you from programs that help a lot and then make things feel even worse in some cases.
So just moving off this area for a bit then, when did games come into your life? And I mean, did you play games as a kid, or is it an interest that you acquired at a later date?
Yeah, I mean, I played a lot of mass market games as a kid and a lot of card games. And then I think I first started playing hobby games about 2005. I went on a retreat with a bunch of folks from my church, and someone had brought a bunch of games. I know we played like Blockus and Carcassonne and Ticket to Ride. I don't remember what else. And I was totally hooked.
And so it was an instant love affair then. It's really interesting because, you look at the Dice Tower and you look at sort of a lot of people who talk about games in America, and it seems to be a theme going through sort of Christian America. Is playing board games and being a Christian somehow linked in America in some way?
That's a good question. I mean, I think a lot of people see it as sort of a wholesome thing, right? It'll keep the kids out of trouble or whatever. I don't know. I go to a Unitarian church, which is not particularly Christian or wholesome. So,
so what is Unitarianism?
Unitarianism, well, it's Unitarian Universalism are sort of two branches that broke off of Protestant Christianity in the 1850s, and so Unitarians challenged the divinity of Christ and just said, there's one God, but we don't believe in the Trinity. And the Universalists broke off and said a good God would not condemn people to hell for eternity. We don't believe in hell. And over time, those two schools of thought sort of evolved, and they merged into one organization in the 1960s that so their tenets are basically like everyone has the right to a free search for their own truth and meaning in the world. We're not going to sort of assert a particular dogma that you need to believe in to be a member of the church. So you'll find atheists and theists mixing together, but just enjoying thinking about how to lead good lives, and a lot more emphasis on sort of the present moment and what we can do to be good people now, and not needing to agree on what happens after you die or what happened 2,000 years ago.
I mean, do you have fixed ideas on that? Do you have a particular faith, or do you vacillate from time to time?
I do not have a lot of what most people would call faith. I mean, I'm a pretty scientific, pragmatic.
And so what does your church give you then that I don't know, because it seems to me, you know, people go to church because they have a sort of dogmatic belief in something that can link them. What does your church give to you that, I don't know, going to a pub doesn't, or going to a board game evening doesn't?
I mean, it's a lot more reflective, right? And so it's community in the same way that either of those is, but then, a moment to pause and reflect on what's important and feel connected to things without needing to put labels on what that connection necessarily is.
So I want to go to your first choice now, and this is something, you're not the first person to have cheated, basically, is what I'm going to say. So you share this distinction, I think, with Rainer Knizia, who chose the same thing, and a number of other people. And this is a standard deck of cards. So firstly, what are you taking these for? Is this for designing, or is this for the plethora of games you can play?
Oh, it didn't even occur to me to take them for design. I haven't designed any games that are based around a standard deck of cards. I grew up playing a lot of hearts and gin rummy, and in college played spades, like many, many games of spades every week, and learned bridge my senior year or just after graduation from college, because we had a housemate who knew bridge and knew that all of the spades players in the house would struggle with their academics if he taught us bridge during the school year. So he taught us that summer. Any of those games I would be happy to play anytime. I don't a lot because I hang out with a lot of board gamers, but they're super easy to learn. And they're fun to play.
And so it's interesting that you say that, because I always think this. When I got into gaming, I sort of dispensed with the traditional card game. And now I've got loads of games that I don't play enough. It seems, I feel a bit guilty for pulling out a normal deck of cards. But do you think there's a resistance on the part of hobby gamers to playing these traditional card games, or do you not find that?
I don't know if there's a resistance. I've never tried. That's a good question. But yeah, I mean, I think the thing that the standard card games are missing are like the beautiful art and the theming, which is something that is very important to me when I enjoy games, although not necessarily the ones, I mean, I say it's important to me, but the ones on my list, that's actually not a strong factor in why I like them for most of them. But certainly in terms of like breaking through and getting people's attention, I think that's becoming more and more of an expectation.
And do you think there are any, because I've sort of become, because I played a lot of trick-taking games as a kid, I've sort of become obsessed with sort of hobby trick-taking games. But there's part of me that kind of thinks none of them are as good as the ones you can play with a normal set of cards. Do you think there's any hobby trick-taking game that has really elevated the form?
I haven't played that many hobby trick-taking games. I would be curious to try more, actually. I mean, the standards, hearts and spades, those have been honed over how many years that people have been playing them. I don't know how much the rules shifted, or if they were sort of, are the spades and hearts that we play the way that it was first designed, or did they evolve over time? I don't know. I feel like they're games that have stuck around for a reason, and maybe evolved to the point that they really had that staying power.
So you said you didn't think about taking these as design aids. So as the humble playing card never factored into your design consideration then? And do you think you might use them in the future?
Yeah, they haven't yet. I wouldn't rule it out if I had something where it seemed like they would be useful, but I just haven't started a design that sort of fit into that structure.
So I want to go on now and talk about your work for the government. So you worked for the US Department of Health and Human Services. What was your job there?
I think my official title was that I was the special assistant to the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation.
And what did that involve? Trying to fit it onto your letterhead, I assume.
Yeah, right. I did a little bit of whatever needed doing for that person. And the office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation was like an office that did a lot of analysis work trying to sort of look at data and figure out solutions to policy issues that were going on. So while I was there, the Children's Health Insurance Program passed, and I did a lot of the work leading up to that, sort of analyzing how many children in the United States don't have insurance, what are their income levels, what are sort of the common health issues that children are having that if they did have more access to insurance might be less of an issue, sort of coming up with data like that to help convince people that expanding insurance to more children would be a good thing. And then I also worked a lot on the Medicare program, reviewing regulations. So Medicare in the U.S. is the program that serves the elderly and people with disabilities. Yeah, I did a lot on like regulations related to nursing homes and post-acute care, things like that.
We, in Europe especially, we kind of look upon the American health system with some sort of bemusement. I mean, because in some quarters, the term universal healthcare is a negative term. I mean, what is the issue with the American health system? Why is there such obstructionism to making sure everyone has access to healthcare?
I don't know. I feel like it's a combination of sort of business interests that don't want to be stepped on or regulated, alongside just this really strong libertarian streak of people not wanting the government to do more than the bare minimum. I don't know. Healthcare has such a weird history in the U.S. So during World War II, there were wage controls to try to fight inflation during wartime. And because businesses couldn't raise wages, large companies started offering health insurance as an added benefit that would sort of get around the wage controls. And then that just became a thing that a lot of unions looked for in their contracts. And eventually it just became this huge private industry to provide these insurance benefits to folks. And now there's, a lot of money in it.
And do you ever envisage a time, I mean, certainly not in the next 2 years, and if the next election goes poorly, the subsequent 4, but do you ever envisage a time where there is something akin to sort of European-style universal healthcare in America, or will it always be this sort of patchwork system? And again, it seems to be an aspect to the American culture which punishes the poor. I mean, do you think that's true?
I mean, it certainly makes it harder and especially sort of the middle class, even more than the poor, because now, so we have a program called Medicaid that covers poor people in most states. But then, like we were talking about before, being just above the cutoff for that program then means that you're facing really high expenses. And that's sort of where most uninsured folks in the States are sort of in that low middle income bracket. So do I think it could ever get to universal insurance? I don't. In fits and starts, we make little bits of progress. So, under Obama, there was we passed a bunch of subsidies for folks sort of in that middle income bracket that I think it would be hard to take away now. And so like each little piece that you add to the puzzle, once people have something, it's really hard to take it away.
I mean, how
doing like sweeping, just like throw everything away and replace it with something else. Like that's just not how policy happens in the United States. And it's fun to dream about, but I can't see it actually happening.
I mean, what did Obamacare do? Was it revolutionary? Did it change a lot for, the average American on the street, or was it a very small sticking plaster over a very large wound?
A little bit of both. I mean, it covered a lot of people that didn't have coverage anymore, but it pretty much built on things that were already there. So, and it relied on states to do some of it. And so like you get this patchwork also of like some states implemented things and some others didn't. So it expanded how far up the income scale states could go with the Medicaid program for poor people. And then it created subsidies for folks above that income level to buy insurance on the private market. And so the insurance on the private market part was sort of new, but really just like putting money into the existing business of private insurance in the States. So in that sense, it wasn't particularly revolutionary, even though it has helped a lot of people buy insurance that couldn't afford it before.
And you don't think Trump will be able to roll all that stuff back then?
I mean, they've been trying for a bunch of years and they haven't been able to actually do it.
And so when we were talking over Twitter about sort of your bio and stuff, you said that you were in Washington on September the 11th, 2001. What was it like working in government on that day? Yeah,
so I was working in the Senate then. I was in a conference room in sort of an interior room. We had no idea what was going on until someone in the meeting I was in got a phone call from a friend of hers checking on her, and we were like, oh, should we be worried about something? And I went back to my office and it had been evacuated. So we left. I walked over to a friend's house that lived on Capitol Hill because there were all these rumors about like things blowing up in Washington, D.C., which, the Pentagon was a ways away from Capitol Hill. But so there was a plane that came down there. And then there was a plane that crashed in Pennsylvania because the passengers took it over that they think was headed for the Capitol or the White House. They're not sure. So, yeah, it was pretty freaky.
I mean, did you feel in danger at any point?
Yeah. It was, no one knew what was going on. And it was the cell phone lines were totally jammed. You couldn't get through to anyone on the phone because everyone was trying to make calls all at the same time. And it was a big day of uncertainty. And I hunkered down at my friend's house and watched TV all day and just footage mostly from New York City just over and over and over again. There was a lot less attention to DC, but it was a pretty weird time to be in DC for sure.
And you said you had an event with some weaponized anthrax. What was that?
Right. So then that October, there was a case. Someone sent several letters through the mail to various media outlets and politicians that had anthrax in them. And one of them got sent to my boss, and the mailroom was right outside my office. So that several people in the office tested positive for having been exposed to anthrax, and we all got to take really long courses of antibiotics. So that was right on the tails of the Twin Towers and the Pentagon, and DC was still kind of under lockdown, and that was a whole nother traumatic experience on top of it. So my office got, like, everything in it got incinerated, basically. It was a total, like, biological, I don't know what you call it. It was totally, like, sealed off and shut down and destroyed, and we had to work out of different offices for months.
And I mean, how long did it take? I mean, you said you worked in the Senate. How long did it take to get back to normal after September the 11th? I mean, were the ramifications felt? I mean, obviously around the world in terms of public policy, in terms of simply getting on a plane, you feel it every day. But how did it feel there? Was there a palpable sense of tension for ages?
I'm trying to remember how long. I mean, there were, like, fighter jets. So there were no commercial flights for a week? Couple weeks. I don't remember exactly, but there were fighter jets and helicopters going overhead all the time. I mean, it felt like martial law or something for a little while. And then, yeah, so when my office in one of the Senate office buildings got shut down, I ended up working in some swing space right off the floor of the Senate. And so it was, it was a strange time. I mean, so the whole, going to war over it and just being right there off the Senate floor while all that was going on was definitely sort of a heightened sense of this is different. It was definitely different for months.
And you being a sort of a genuine person who's worked in real American politics, when you see things like The West Wing and these kind of TV shows that are set in Washington, how realistic are they? And to what degree is that sort of backroom bartering and stuff just a fabrication of the TV writers?
That's a really good question. The West Wing's really the only one that I watched, which I loved, because I feel like The West Wing is like this idealization of everything. Like, there's a lot of truth in it, but then everyone is much better spoken and can actually get things done. And in real life, you feel like you're beating your head against the wall a lot more of the time, and just trying to get, like, tiny little incremental things done. But it's, as far as a TV representation of it, it's not untrue. It's just
idealized. And I mean, do people on the other sides of the aisles hate each other, or is that purely sort of posturing for the Senate? And do they, go off to bars and have drinks together and talk about the business and things?
I think it has gotten much worse over time. When I was there were a few people on the other side of the aisle that I was kind of friendly with, but mostly it was very segregated. My understanding is that, 10 or 20 years before I was there, so like in the 60s, 70s, there was more sort of socialization among the members and the staff. I think the members used to socialize a lot because they used to be much more stuck in Washington. And as plane travel became cheaper and easier, folks get out of town every possible second they can. And a lot of people think that has broken down some of the social structure of the institutions.
And do you think that filters down into society when you see the politicians fighting and offering each other no sort of professional, what's the word I'm looking for? A professional courtesy. Do you think that reflects on the public? And can that be sort of an origin of the division that we see in wider society?
Yeah, I think it is related to some extent. I don't know if it's the driving force behind it, but I think people will say things about other politicians that they aren't friendly with, that they would never say to someone that they were, going out and having drinks with after the end of the day.
And in general, do you think most of the people there are just trying to do the best with what they can, or are there some real crooks there, would you say?
I think it's mostly people trying, like, they really truly believe on both sides of the aisle that their worldview is going to help people. I mean, that is one thing that, even though I've been super involved in politics and have very deeply held views about what I think is right and the best way to make things better, I really do believe that it is possible to hold views that are diametrically opposed to mine and still be a good person and hold them for, legitimate reasons, and just have, different ideas and be using different data about what's the best way to fix things.
So I want to go on now to your next game, and this is a classic. This is Castles of Burgundy. So why are you taking this one with you?
It's just a really solid game, and one that has made it to my table more than most, and I am still happy to break it out quite a bit. It plays great at 2 players. I don't think I mentioned in my my overall how did I pick my games, but my spouse is definitely less of a gamer than I am, and so the question of what games is my spouse willing to play with me is a harder one, and this is one that he enjoys as well. I think it was the first game that I played that did dice in a way where there is still randomness, but you're not necessarily going for higher or lower, and each number has its own value to you that, some turns you might really want a 4 and some turns you might really want a 1, but it's not that you always want 6s, that they're always better than anything else. And that kind of blew my mind when I first played it.
And I mean, what do you think Stefan Feld offers as a game designer? What do you think? What do you think is really good about him? And are there elements to his game design that annoy you, frustrate you, or make him unattractive to play?
He tends to have a lot going on in his games. A lot of different routes to victory. A lot of ways to earn points. Which can be good and bad. So I have played Stefan Feld games where I feel like they went too far in that direction, where there's just too much to keep track of, too many options to parse on every turn. What should I be doing? I feel like Castles of Burgundy is sort of in a sweet spot where there is a lot going on, and you always have a lot of options, but it never feels too much to me. And
I mean, I think this is his highest ranked game on BGG, and a lot of people say that it's his best. Firstly, do you think that's true? And secondly, why do you think people hold this game in such regard?
I don't know if I've played enough of them to say that whether I agree that it's his best. It's definitely my favorite out of the ones that I've played. And I really do think it's that sweet spot of like always having interesting decisions to make, but not so many options that you feel overwhelmed by it. For me, that's there's something so satisfying about finishing your little areas on the board. Like, people love building things and feeling like they've completed things. And I think that's possibly one reason that it's such a satisfying game to play. And there's that nice feeling of like there's some you can finish off really quickly, and then there's some that you're building towards through the whole game. There's just a lot of nice little balancing features like that.
And do you think he's influenced you at all as a designer?
That's a good question. Not consciously. I've never gone, I want to do this thing the way that Stefan Feld does it. But I mean, I think to a certain extent, all designers are probably influenced by the games, especially the ones that we play more frequently. It just becomes part of how your brain works, and sort of your bag of solutions to problems that you can pull from, and without necessarily always saying, oh, Stefan Feld did it this way in Castles of Burgundy. That's an option. It's just like, oh, that's a thing you can do. But.
And so I want to move on now to your designing. So when did you start designing games? So you said you got into playing games in 2004. When did that transmogrify into designing?
Probably about 2014, I want to say. 2013, 2014. It was really a conversation with some friends of mine about why do we always play all these games that are about things that we don't care about, including Castles of Burgundy. And some other games on my list, that, you know, as much as I appreciate things like Castles of Burgundy that are, you know, just great games and it doesn't really matter what the theme is, I would rather play that same game with a theme that I love or something that I care about. So I decided to try and make a game that was about something that I cared about.
And was it a natural progression for you to start designing when you decided to go on and make something about the thing you love? Did it come easily, or was there a lot of spade work and a lot of failures before you made something that you were happy with?
So Wingspan was the first thing I tried making, and I just kept working on it for years until it got to a place that I liked it. So yeah, it was a lot of work.
And so it came out this year. So that's 2019. You said 2014. So you were designing it for basically 5 years then?
Yeah, although my part of it was really wrapped up sort of this time last year. It takes a long time to get a game physically to market after it has been designed.
And I mean, so now you've got some more stuff which we'll come to later that's coming out this year. So now you're sort of a seasoned, published game designer. What do you think your strengths are as a designer? What are you good at and what are you not so good at?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I've been doing it long enough to know. I mean, I've been doing it for 5 years, I should know. But I don't know. What are my strengths? I think that I am good at seeing things in playtests that are not working and realizing that they're not working and coming up with things to change. I am not as good as some other designers, I think, at seeing ahead of time how things are going to play out.
Do you think that's a matter of experience, though? Because it seems to me what happens in your head is very different to what happens in the wild, no?
Yeah, and it's one of the pieces of advice that I give to new designers all the time is like, you have to get it out of your head and onto the table. Like, you may have fantastic ideas, but there is going to be something in there that doesn't work the way you expect it to for some reason, and you really can't see it until you just make a physical prototype and start playing with it.
So we'll move on then to your next game, and frankly, I'd have been disappointed had you have not chosen this one. And this is Wingspan. So, I mean, you said you wanted to make a game that you loved, about a subject that you loved. Are you a bird watcher? Are you a sort of naturey person? Do you get out there with the binoculars and look at thrushes and things?
I do. Yes, I am both a bird watcher and a more generally nature-loving person.
Because there was a big sort of revolution about 10 years ago in Britain on British TV. An ex-comedian did this bird-watching program, and it sort of caught on British TV, and it was a really big thing, and they'd have little mini cameras in nests and all of that sort of stuff, so you could see the chicks growing and things. What is it about birds? Explain the fascination to me.
I mean, first of all, they're just beautiful creatures, right? But the process of bird watching is enjoyable to me, first of all, because I just enjoy being outside, and I enjoy learning things about what I'm looking at. And before I was a birder, I was a big plant person as well, and I'm also a mushroomer. And for all three, I enjoy learning specifically what I'm looking at. I feel much more connected to the outdoors when I know what everything is. So if you're going on a hike and you don't know any specific species of anything, it's all just sort of an undifferentiated green blob, right? But once you start knowing some of the trees and the plants or the bird songs or anything, any little piece of it, it's then like you're seeing old friends, like you know what you're looking at and hearing, and it makes it a totally different experience.
So if I hear a crow, I understand that. I recognize that. If I hear a cuckoo, I recognize that. Everything else sounds exactly the same to me. How long does it sort of take to develop that sort of nuance and understand, oh, that's a thrush, that's a nightingale, that sort of thing?
Oh, I mean, I've been birding for 10 years at least, and I still, especially because birds aren't singing all year long. They're really most active in spring. Every spring I have to relearn a lot of them. And my husband retains more of them from year to year than I do. It's just the way his brain works. So it helps that I go out birding with him and he knows. It is something that you can learn, and the one trick for me that I have learned is that I retain the connection between the song and the bird better if I actually get my eyes on the bird while it is singing. For some reason that makes the connection between the sound and the visual, and then I remember it much better.
And what's the process? I mean, do you have a big compendium of birds that you take out with you? Is there an app now? And has the digital world invaded your sort of bucolic paradise then? So
I still really enjoy hardback hard copy bird guides. And if I'm going somewhere where I don't know the birds, I will usually still pick up a copy of a hard copy of a field guide. But there are great apps. Merlin is a free app that's put out by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And I believe they have, you can download birds sort of by region. So you don't have to download the whole world at once. But, when I went to Belize and Guatemala this winter, you could download sort of that pack of birds for your phone. And then you've got the bird songs and photos and descriptions of them that you can use to look things up. And having the songs in there is huge because a lot of times you will hear a bird and not get a really good look at it. And being able to confirm what you saw by what you're hearing is definitely a part of getting a lot of species down.
I mean, so I clearly have demonstrated I know nothing about birds or bird watching, but I assume I'm trusting you that Wingspan is sort of scientifically pretty exact and pretty rigorous. Was it important to you that the game be that?
Yeah, I mean, so I wanted it to be real birds, and once I was doing real birds, I didn't feel like I could put anything that was patently untrue on the cards, right? So then I had to look up all the real information about them and use that.
And so what was the road to getting it published? And I mean, if I was publishing a game, my brain doesn't work in that way, so it's never going to happen. But if I was, I mean, Stonemaier would be almost a dream destination for a game. So what was the road to getting it published, and how did you feel when Stonemaier picked it up?
Yeah, so I pitched it at Gen Con in 2016, which was the year that Scythe came out. So Stonemaier was just becoming more of a big deal as I was pitching it. Which is sort of an interesting phenomenon. But Yeah, I looked at the list of all the publishers that were going to be at Gen Con that year and went through a lot of them, sort of looking at their catalogs of games, trying to figure out who would be interested in a game about birds, ruled out anyone that had lines that were all, high fantasy, science fiction stuff, because I figured they just wouldn't be interested. But, for example, Stonemaier had Viticulture, which is sort of a real world modern times game about something kind of lovely. I thought that there was an outside chance that they might be interested, so I gave it a shot. And actually that year, I don't think Stonemaier does this anymore, but they had to set up a pitch meeting with them. You just grabbed a half-hour slot that was like an event that you could sign up for at Gen Con, just like signing up to play a scheduled game at Gen Con. So I didn't have to convince them ahead of time that they were interested in meeting with me. I just grabbed a slot. The other two publishers I met with, I did sort of email back and forth to set up a meeting and told them what the game was. And, and so all three of them sort of gave me notes on the spot. This is, things you ought to think about. And then Jamie was the one that reached out to me afterwards and sort of said, okay, what do you think about the feedback that we gave you? What would you do to implement some of those things? And that started our long development process of sort of back and forth by email, working on improving it to the point where it got published.
And so how different is it now from that 2016 pitch?
Quite different, for sure. Yeah, we worked on it for, year and a half, back and forth, really. The thing that we worked on the most, or sort of the core of the changes, was really amping up the engine building aspect of it. And everything else that changed was sort of in service of that.
And so it's been the undeniable sort of hit of 2019. I guess there's two questions here. Firstly, does that surprise you that there's such an appetite for sort of a realistic sort of science-based game? And secondly, were you surprised at kind of how annoyed people got that they weren't able to get hold of it for 2 months?
So the fact that it was a big hit was definitely a big surprise. I mean, because going into game design, right, everyone says there's no money in it. A good game sells 5,000 copies. Be happy if you make it to that point. So that was sort of what I had in my head all along in terms of realistic expectations for a game. Like, I thought it was good, but there's never a guarantee that other people will think, there's plenty of good games that never quite hit for one reason or another. So that was definitely a surprise. And with the theme, I think the bird theme has ended up helping Wingspan a lot. I think it appeals to a lot of people, but there was a good chance that it could have gone the other way, and hardcore gamers who don't care about birds could have said, that's ridiculous, we're not interested. I think enough gamers were willing to give Stonemaier a chance when they said this was a good game, that then the word started getting out of like, oh yeah, even if you're not interested in birds, check this one out. But then I think themes about nature just naturally appeal to people, even if they don't think they're nature-y people. It's soothing and pretty and something that I think most people naturally want to engage with.
I mean, those eggs are insanely beguiling. When you have a board covered with them, I don't know whether you get them in America, but there's the thing we get in England called mini eggs, and you only get them at Easter. And they're sort of chocolate eggs with sort of sugar coating, and they look exactly like the eggs in Wingspan.
Yeah, I had never had them before, but you can get them here at Easter time. I don't know how long that's been true, but my grandmother used to buy me the Cadbury eggs, the bigger ones with the gooey middle.
Yeah, the cream eggs.
That's kind of disgusting and amazing at the same time. But I had never had the mini eggs.
And yeah, so were you surprised that people were so indignant that they couldn't get hold of the game? And have you did you get any grief? I assume Jamie got a lot of angry people. Did that filter down to you at all?
Not too much. I mean, I got the question a lot of like, how can I get my hands on this? But not any anger. And I don't know if Jamie felt like it was a lot of anger as much as there was a small element of anger and a lot of just like, when can we get it? When can we get it? Without anger attached to it. But the thing that mystifies me the most are the people that were like thinking that this was somehow part of some grand strategy on Stonemaier Games' part to like manufacture a shortage, which is just terrible business sense. Like, you don't want to have an article in the New York Times, which, by the way, was like not pitched to them by us. Like they reached out to us. You don't want to have an article in the New York Times and then not have copies available to sell to people immediately when they read that article. There's no guarantee that they're going to come back a month or two later when the game is available again and then buy a copy, right? Like, it's just not a good strategy to not have enough available. It was definitely not a purposeful shortage.
And so to wrap up on Wingspan then, do you have a favourite bird?
So one of my favorite birds in real life is called a roseate spoonbill. I think you guys in Europe have like a European spoonbill that's white. It has so both spoonbills have this crazy long beak that actually has like a spoon-shaped thing on the end of it. It's flat and it's good for picking up crustaceans, I think. And so like crazy beak plus the roseate spoonbill here in the Americas is bright pink. So it's just it's like a wonder of evolution. Like, how does this thing exist? I don't know.
So I want to go on now to talk about sort of women in games and sort of your contribution to it. So you have a database of female designers on the website, on your website. Why did you start this?
I got invited to several events that I could not attend and got asked, who are other women that we could invite, and got tired of putting together the same list over and over again. But also got tired of in media accounts about Wingspan, a lot of articles said things like that I was one of the only women designers of board games, which is just not true. I am now one of the more successful women. Like, I'm one of very few that are in the top 200 on BGG. But I'm not one of the only ones. There's like almost 200 women on that list now, with published board games around the world. So yeah, just wanting to use my 15 minutes of fame to help elevate some other people and get some more word out about women doing great stuff, and to try and sort of normalize the idea that all game designers are not guys. I've had a lot of experiences going out to playtesting events and gaming events in general, where I am often one of very few women. And that can be uncomfortable. And I've never been treated badly in ways that I perceived were because I was a woman. But even just being in an extreme minority, or having people be surprised that I'm there is uncomfortable, and I'd like to make it a little easier for other folks.
And I mean, there's obviously these factors. Do you think women have a disadvantage in the gaming world? And I don't really want to talk about as gamers, because that's also an area, but as professionals, entering as designers, as artists, as, people who, as publishers, all of these sort of aspects.
I mean, there's a lot of work out there about unconscious bias. I don't perceive that there are a lot of publishers that are consciously discriminating, although it's certainly possible. And I actually talked to one woman at the end of last year who was in a game design contest that was sort of publicly judged, where one of the judges, who is an established publisher, successful publisher, said some things to her that were not acceptable. So there are definitely people that are being sort of overtly biased, but there is also a lot of work out there in general in many different fields about the unconscious bias that a lot of people have. And I do think it's possible that that's at work, and it's really hard to test. But I think it's helpful for people to keep in the back of their minds that that is a possibility. I think another thing that happens is that a lot of publishers, reasonably so, are much more interested in publishing games by people that already have a successful track record as designers, as published designers. And that just reinforces that games get published by the same types of designers that have already gotten published. And so if we ever want to get more people of color, more women published, you have to have publishers that are willing to break out of that and take risks on new designers.
I mean, because there's a lot of talk about, in all fields at the moment, about representation. What does representation do? Why is it a good thing? Why should we care about it?
I mean, I think ultimately representation in games is going to broaden the field of gamers. So if I'm walking into a gaming event that is more men than women, and then I sit down to play games, and over every game that I play is all male characters. And thank God we're moving away from male characters plus women in bikinis. Like that, it just makes it that much worse and that much less likely that I'm going to keep coming back. Whereas if I walk into this event and I'm one of the only women there, but the games have lots of women in them or are about other subjects that are interesting to me that don't necessarily represent people at all, that's going to be a very different feel.
I mean, is it fundamentally about feeling that there are people like you who share your interests?
Yes. And, and being more interested in games that are about things that I'm interested in, including people that I want to see.
And I think it's interesting because I've been thinking a lot about sort of Twitter and how toxic the internet can be, and how the way I see myself sometimes acting, and certainly people who I've met who act in sort of a way on Twitter that I think you would never sort of do that face to face. And yet Twitter is often used as an analog for real life. Do you think we make a mistake in thinking that Twitter is really what people think?
That's a good question. I mean, there's a lot going on Twitter besides what you actually think. There's a lot of sort of presenting a public persona that can get in the way of saying what you actually think. And then there's the sort of, so that's a more positive side of it, right? So that may not involve being mean to people, but you may still not be saying what you actually think. And then the negative side of it is, that people are much less inhibited online than they are face-to-face in face-to-face interactions. I don't know. I was bracing myself for much worse than I got when Wingspan came out, and part of it may be that I just subscribed to the right block lists. But I was really concerned because I know women who are active in sort of content creation in board games who've had horrible things said to them. I was really bracing myself that might happen with Wingspan, but it hasn't come to pass. So I don't know why not, but I'll take it.
It's really strange. I think it's something to do with content creation. When your face is out there and your voice is out there, people, and also there's a feeling of ownership, and people feel like they can criticize, and sometimes that criticism is eloquent, and sometimes that criticism is base.
Yeah. And I wonder also if I don't sort of get some benefit of having sort of the protective aura of Jamie Stegmaier associated with me. And certainly, the community that he has created on the Facebook page for Wingspan is just amazing and so positive. And there's like almost 5,000 people there right now. So that's been like the best of social media board game world, to be participating in that, and just to be hearing from people every day who are enjoying the game. And it's been great.
So your next game then is Race for the Galaxy. So why this one as opposed to Roll for the Galaxy?
Yeah, I've only played Roll for the Galaxy once. I had already been playing Race for the Galaxy, I think, for years when I tried Roll for the Galaxy, and it just felt totally wrong to me. But I think because I started with Race. I don't know. I have probably played Race for the Galaxy more than any other game. It's such a sweet, quick little 2-player game. My husband and I play it all the time. And we'll do a lot of like best 2 out of 3 kinds of things. So, there's something I enjoy about the cards more than the dice, that even though the cards are also very random, the dice really feel uncontrollable to me.
And they always say that the big problem with Race for the Galaxy is the opacity of its icons and things. Is this unfair? Or because this is a game I'm ashamed to say I've never played myself. Is that unfair? Isn't it unfair criticism, or is it a pain in the arse to learn?
I think it's totally fair. It's like learning a whole new language. It's a ridiculous learning curve, and I have a lot of friends that aren't willing to put in the effort. But I don't know, for whatever reason I did, and I really enjoy it.
And you said this is the game that you played the most, and also you said that, games that you play influence your design. Have you ever consciously lifted elements from Race for the Galaxy, or ideas, ways of solving problems, or do you think it's snuck in there subconsciously?
I think that the first versions of Wingspan were very consciously related to Race for the Galaxy, for sure. Because it's, card-based engine building. Yeah, definitely some relation in it. And it makes me smile when reviewers mention that they see the relationship, because it's there for sure.
And, how do you feel about sort of designers of these games? Do you see these? Because I remember my first Essen and I met Vlada Chvátil, and it was crazy, and I felt, completely starstruck. Do you have that similar feeling towards designers of the games that you love? And have you met the designer of Race for the Galaxy, for instance, or would you like to, and would you feel starstruck by it?
I have not met the designer of Race for the Galaxy. I would love to. Yes, I have felt very starstruck by people. So, I go to Unpub every year in Baltimore, and lots of designers come out to that. And until this year, I was sort of, totally unknown, totally starstruck. And then this year, it was such a different experience to have, known designers coming up to me and going, "Oh my gosh, so good to meet you." I'm like, "Oh my God, what is this?"
Did you feel like saying, "How dare you? I've been here for years, and it's only now I'm successful"?
I mean, there is a little bit of that, right? But I'll take it. I won't complain.
So I want to talk now about the future. So you've got games coming out this year, I believe. So what have you got coming in the future?
Yeah, so May 28th will be the Kickstarter for Tussie Mussie, which is a 18-card game that was inspired by this Victorian fad related to giving people flowers, and people call it the language of flowers, like assigning meaning to specific flowers that you gave to people. So in the game, you're giving flowers to the people you're playing with, but you give one card face up and one card face down, and they have to decide which one they keep and which one they give back to you. And eventually you end up with a little collection of flowers that score based on what else is in your collection. So some cards may be much more valuable to you than to other players, depending on what you already have. And as you do this it's sort of I split you choose, right? And you have to sort of try and figure out, this person's offering me this thing face up. Is it because they think that's the one I want and they want the one that they put face down? Or is the thing that's face down actually the one that's better for me, and that's why they're not showing it to me? A lot of that dynamic. So that was the way that I tried to sort of squeeze more decision making and sort of intrigue out of a deck that's only 18 cards.
And do you have any other sort of bigger box games, any magnum opuses, if that's the plural, in the future?
So not a magnum opus, but sort of a gateway level game that I just signed with AEG. The working title is Mariposas, which means butterflies in Spanish. It's about monarch butterflies and their migration from Mexico to North America, which happens every year. So you're moving butterflies around on a map, collecting flowers, and making more butterflies, and then racing back to Mexico in the fall. So that'll be out hopefully sometime in 2020. The date's not exactly set yet.
And so it seems to me that you like to make games that have a grounding in science. I mean, do you think this is an underused topic in gaming, and do you see it happening more in the future?
I think just in the last few years, you've been seeing more and more of them. There's been some great ones that have come out in the last few years. I was very interested to see the game Endangered that was just on Kickstarter.
I did the voiceover for the Kickstarter video, actually. #humblebrag.
And, there's the stuff Genius Games has been doing for many years now with super, STEM teaching games. And some of those are, good games in their own right, but I think their market is really the classroom. And I love seeing things that are busting out sort of into being people not necessarily caring whether it ever gets used in a classroom, but just using the subject matter as things that might also be of interest to gamers.
And so what do you want to achieve as a game designer? And because you still work within the field of health, I guess you still have a day job. I mean, do you envisage any time in the future being a game designer full time, or do you still want to keep it as a sideline so essentially it doesn't turn into as much of a job and you're going to hate it?
I mean, there is that danger, right? I think I'm still trying to find that balance. I've been part-time in my day job for a long time, but, regardless of how Wingspan has done, I've been pretty fortunate to be able to do that just because of how I could structure my consulting gigs, because I like to travel and do other things as well. And so the trick has really been keeping game design contained so that because it's always been something that I thought of more as a hobby that's allowed to fill up a lot of my spare time right now, the struggle for me has been, okay, it is starting to feel more like its own job, and I need to be more conscious of creating boundaries and treating it like a job that fits, that still leaves me time to do other things.
And so Wingspan hasn't enabled you to retire yet, then?
I could probably retire if I wanted to, separate from Wingspan having happened, but I haven't done it yet.
So I want to go on then to your last game, and this is Between Two Castles of Mad King Ludwig. Now, I own Castles of Mad King Ludwig. I own Between Two Cities. Why should I try this game?
This game has replaced both of its predecessors for me.
In what way?
So it keeps some of the things that I love the best about both of them and gets rid of others. So I love the working with your two neighbors aspect, the between two concept is something I really enjoy. And it keeps that from between two cities. But then it keeps some of the really interesting scoring mechanics and set collection from Between Two Castles and Mad King Ludwig. And then the thing it does that I like better than either game is that the views of the castle rooms are as if you're in the room looking at the things in it instead of top down. Mm-hmm. So the art is beautiful. And it gets rid of the auction from Between Two Castles, which some people love, but I feel like with the people that I play with, it just slows the game down so much. And the wonderful thing about the Between Two model is that there's almost no downtime because it's simultaneous play. And, that's just lovely, especially for bigger groups of people.
And this game, it's a stablemate to Wingspan. They're both Stonemaier games. Do you think there's a unifying character to Stonemaier's games?
I don't know. I mean, they're all visually very appealing to me. And one of the ways the Stonemaier articulates what they're looking for in games that are pitched to them is they want event games that would be like the meaty game that you might organize a game night around. They're not interested in filler games. And so that's sort of a weight and a length more than anything more specific than that. But it does make their games feel more similar to each other than a company that tries to have some fillers and some super heavy games. And then I just think, I don't know, Euphoria is sort of in that science fiction dystopia world that is more common among board games. But even then, it's sort of a unique take on that theme. And then viticulture is a very unusual theme. Scythe is its own whole world. It's not sort of high fantasy tropes or anything like that. And then Between Two Castles is this very whimsical theme, but based on a real world thing. So even theme-wise, maybe they do have something in common, or at least they're each out of the ordinary in their own way.
So one last question then. You're driving to the cabin, fleeing the apocalypse, driving out of Washington, D.C., and you go around a corner, the back door of the car flies open. 4 of the games fly out, down a ravine, are swept down a river, and are gone forever. Which game do you hope is lying on the backseat of the car?
I think I have to say Wingspan. I felt bad even including it. You say you would have been disappointed, but it feels weird, right? To say you want your own game more than any other. But, not even just for the gameplay, but just as this piece of my life work. I spent so long working on it. It feels like this amazing achievement. How can I not keep that?
Brilliant. Well, if people want to get hold of you, how would they go about doing that?
I am pretty active on board game Twitter at Eliz Hargrave, so Eliz Hargrave. And I mentioned the Facebook page for Wingspan. I also check in there most days. There's lots of people talking about the game there.
Elizabeth Hargrave, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And if you want to suggest a guest, or if you want to say something nice about the show, or if you want to say something horrible about the show, you can contact me on @5gamesfordoomsday on Twitter. You can send me an email at 5gamesfordoomsday@gmail.com. You can give a rolling donation to help support the show at patreon.com/5G4D, or a one-time PayPal donation at the bottom of the website 5gamesfordoomsday.com. And if you fancy looking swanky, you can buy a t-shirt at tpublic.com/user/5gamesfordoomsday, and trust me, you won't see better designs in the whole of the board game world, or probably the world that remains. And
if I haven't had to deny my affiliation to escape the bureaucratic eagles and the swarms of people who bore me. I'll see you in 2 weeks for another 5 games for Doomsday.